Hello there, welcome. Are organic foods healthier? This is a big debate I'm going to be covering in this video. So thanks for joining me. I'm Andrea Hallwegner, registered dietitian and CEO of Health Stand Nutrition since year 2000. And this is a common topic of discussion that many people want to know. So I want to know in the comments, are you confused about organic versus conventional based growing, and if it's worth spending the extra dollars on buying organic based food? So let me know in the comments if this is something that you have thought about, wondered about as you're in the grocery store. This is certainly something I want to cover in today's session. Now, how I want to start off as well is just reminding you that I'm also going to be covering the number one question and the number one myth that I think you need to know about organic-based foods. So stay tuned, join me on the video. I'm going to be addressing the number one myth and things that people often say, I didn't know that about organic-based foods. So join me here. If you found this topic very confusing, you are not alone. In fact, you know, as a dietitian and a parent myself, I'm very concerned about how our food is grown, very concerned about overall health and wellness and the type of food that I put into my growing 7-year-old son, because technically I'm growing a little person and I want to fuel him up with the best nutrition possible, both for him as well as our family and clients in general. So to give you a little bit of background, as a daughter of parents that actually grew up on a farm, my mom was raised about an hour outside of Calgary here in the community of Strathmore. And on her family-based farm, my grandparents farmed all sorts of obviously traditional crops in terms of grains, as well as some livestock way back in the day. And then currently right now, I have an aunt and an uncle, as well as many of my cousins that are actively on the family farm growing things conventionally. And certainly are very conscientious and interested in making sure that they're producing quality and healthy food for all. So that's sort of a little bit of a background on a personal front in terms of my background. And what I can also tell you is, as a dietitian, I've spent a lot of time doing farm-based tours, both conventional farms as well as organic-based farms, so that I could see for myself right on the ground, like what looks different, let's say on an organic carrot farm versus a conventional one. And certainly when it comes to raising, whether that's meat and animals and plants, but have definitely set foot on both of those different types of farms to really see for myself. And so I wanted to dive into this very controversial subject and just really give you my sense as a dietitian and a parent on what I see to be most important for you to know about this ever-developing, growing, and trending industry. So what does organic actually mean? So I want to pull out a couple of my notes here just so I get all of this information right. First of all, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in Canada is the governing body that really looks at both the growing and the labeling of foods that are organic. And so there's definitely some very stringent requirements on what it means to call a food on the grocery store shelf with a clear Canada Organic label. There's very, very clear stringent restrictions that need to be in place. Organic farmers use both composting of plant-based material as well as manure-based material as they consider sort of their growing techniques. And they also use a lot of what's called crop rotation, which I'm sure many of you know about, where it's beneficial to the soil to be able to rotate the types of crops being grown. They're also looking at feeding animals only organic-based food. So for example, if we're talking about an organic chicken, we know that they are fed 100% organic-based feed in order to be called an organic-based chicken. So it's all through sort of the entire food line there. We also know organic growers produce things without any man-made or synthetic-based fertilizers, pesticides, growth hormones, and GMOs or genetically modified organisms. So that's kind of what the word organic-based food means. Now, I want to dive into the number one myth that I promised you here about organic foods. And the number one myth is this. Organic food doesn't necessarily not have pesticides or hormones into the food. And so sometimes people think when they're consuming or choosing an organic based item, it'll mean that there's absolutely no pesticides found on that food or no growth hormones used or hormones and antibiotics used at all. And that's actually untrue because first of all, when we come to a sick animal, if you were raising, whether it's cattle or poultry, pork as well. So regardless of the meat that we're talking about, it would be very unethical to not provide treatment for a sick animal. And so there are times, both obviously in conventional and in organic based growing, that those become very important for the health of the animal. And then what I can tell you is both within the conventional and the organic industry, those animals are very much separated out for food production, and they're not put into the food system right away when we're treating something with antibiotics. That's really important for all animals that we have that. So that's the number one myth, is they could actually have some pesticides and some hormones within the food. Particularly in the organic industry, one of the most used or common based pesticides used is copper sulfate. And it's a natural based pesticide, and it's used quite extensively in just helping to increase the yield or the amount of food that's grown. And that's again, something that we see much more heavily being used in the organic industry than in conventional growing, because what conventional growers are thinking about is, I would say, more current science-based, evidence-based types of pesticides that have less impact on the environment and less impact on human health than the traditional ones used in organic growing. And so I just wanted to allude to that because I think there is that myth that organic is 100% free of pesticides and antibiotics, which is definitely not the case. The other, if I was to add a third sort of myth into this mix, what we know about organic-based production is that they're not the only ones using methods to help ensure that we're managing the quality of the soil from an environmental perspective and soil degradation in general. Both conventional growers and organic growers are going to be very concerned about maintaining good soil quality, because if they don't, it means they're going to have less yield of the food produced, which is really important from a cost perspective and a yield perspective to be able to produce really high quality and high yields of food. So conventional growers, of course, my own family, uncles, aunts, cousins, know about the importance of things like crop rotation and really looking at the quality of the soil, because it absolutely affects the bottom line in terms of what they're producing. So just as an FYI on that one. So that's kind of what the word organic actually means. I want to dive into this whole concept now of, does organic foods, are they more nutritious than conventionally grown items? So the first sort of thing to keep in mind here is, just because something is organic from a food label perspective does not necessarily mean they are healthy. And I think we can all probably think of a few examples that you'll see in the grocery store where you could walk down sort of that health organic aisle and take a look and see a whole bunch of very ultra processed foods, cookies and sugar-laden breakfast cereals, and items that they may have organic ingredients in them, but probably not ones that we want to be consuming in high quantity in our everyday diet. In fact, I received a note from someone on email here that had read the article that I've written on, or is organic actually healthier? And you'll see that link if you want to read the whole article in the top of this video here. You can link and read the whole thing. But here's what Morgan had to say. Hi, Andrea. Thanks for the organic versus conventional article. I have a very hard time convincing some of my friends that our choice to not buy organic doesn't mean that I'm trying to inflict cancer on my whole family. It can be maddening, to be honest. I'll give my kid an unorganic apple versus their sugary organic packaged food any day. Keep up the great work. from Morgan. So Morgan, I could not agree with you more. At the end of the day, when we're talking about health, it's really looking at whole foods, those that are grown on trees, found more naturally in nature. That is going to always be the best vehicle for health. So I loved your quote, Morgan, so thanks for sharing that. I thought that was very well said. So what we know as well, when we start to look at the research on foods organically grown versus conventionally, from a vitamin and mineral perspective, this is where things get interesting, because some of the research will show that organic-based growing actually improves the overall vitamin and mineral quality. And then in other articles, it'll be about the same. And in some cases, we're seeing research come out that says it's actually lower. So much of the vitamins and minerals found in a particular food depend on a whole array of things, including the soil quality, obviously, the growing conditions, harvesting methods, length of time before the food is consumed, and even the overall diet of the actual animal itself. Is all of those things are going to really impact, how much vitamins and minerals and omega-3s and fibers, all of that stuff is found naturally in our food. So the one thing that is a little bit more clear is overall the research is showing that organic foods may have a lower level of certain types of pesticides and hormones than in conventionally grown items. So we might see a little bit more of a benefit there, just more conscientious, perhaps in the organic industry on not overusing those. I don't know, but I'm just providing the message and some information for you. But that tends to be what we're seeing. But I do want to add that Canada itself has some of the strictest and highest quality regulations around food to really stringently monitor that we are getting good, safe, and healthy food here. So I did want to put that FYI in, because I think compared to most places on the planet, we got it pretty good in Canada here from the perspective of overall health. So bigger debate here becomes, is organic sort of the best way going forward? If we're thinking about the best way to feed the world, we're thinking about the best way to feed yourself and your family. What we know again about that organic-based industry is it's really focused on the natural and the traditional is best. And unfortunately what that means is some of the best new sort of research and science advantages that we have on improving the overall sustainability of the food that we're producing, and really to be able to keep up with that growing overall global need for producing food. Those things are not necessarily available to organic growers, because again, it's very much based on tradition. So here's where, as someone trained in science, I am going to say we've got to keep up with the science, folks. And I think that there's some really wonderful new growing techniques, certainly some wonderful options for pesticides and herbicides that are way better for human health than things like copper sulfate that's been used in the organic industry for so many years. So I want you to keep an open mind with this subject. If you're someone that's been super it's gotta be all organic, I want to challenge you on digging into looking at some of that research a little bit further and see for yourself what you think. Because I've been impressed with some of the advances that are going on in science that either make the pesticide, let's say, less stuck on a food, so the half-life or how quickly it comes off of a food tends to be shorter, or the amount that is added or the toxicity level can be lower than, again, some of those conventional or some of those organic-based pesticides that have been used for many years. So keep an open mind on this subject. I think we've got, like I said, some really interesting research and science coming out that's doing a better job at helping make sure that we're improving overall human health and improving the overall quality of being able to produce high yields of food. One of the other challenges in thinking about sort of the way forward in terms of how we grow our food is what we know about organic food production is that the yields tend to be quite low, and the amount of land required to grow the volume of food we're going to require is going to be fairly challenging. In conventional growing, those can be addressed a little bit better. And we also know one of the things when I was digging into the research on this subject, I came up with some research that talked about the carbon footprint of composting, and it's surprisingly large. So let me read this out for you. Fertilizing half a hectare creates as much greenhouse gas emissions as driving a car over 27,000 kilometers. And so again, in keeping up with science, we got to think about not just composting, but we got to think about some of the other ways we can use to grow food in a sustainable way. What we also know, again, is organic growers typically like to use a lot of what we call plant cover crops. And then cover crops typically will go over to sort of manage weeds, but by actually putting a cover crop in to attempt to improve the soil, what we see is because they don't have access to using herbicides and that, what ends up happening is to be able to remove those cover crops in preparation for planting sort of the next overall crop the following year, you're having to use a lot of tillage. And that tillage, that digging and that stirring and that overturning of the soil can actually worsen the overall soil quality. So again, there's always pros and cons to all of this. We got to look at the overall big picture when we're talking about organic versus conventional. You know, if I was to give you sort of the bottom line, I think we've got to use a little bit of information from both of those industries. I think there's some wonderful things that organic growers are doing to really help think about sustainability and just being really intentional and careful about what we put onto our food. I think that mindset and philosophy is fantastic, but I also think we want to learn from what's going on in research and development in conventional growing to really help make sure that we're using the best products in the smallest quantities and producing the highest yields so that we can continue to provide cost-effective food as well as be able to feed the world. Because again, this is not just a developing or developed nation debate. We have to think about also some of the developing countries as well. So what matters most to me as a dietitian and a parent when we get into sort of this whole debate on organic versus conventional is at the end of the day, I just want you to eat more plant-based foods. I want you to eat more fruits and veggies, regardless if they're organic or conventional. We know people that eat the most plant-based foods have the lowest risk of disease overall. And given that the world consumes mostly conventionally grown produce, what that means is that, again, the most important thing is just eat the good stuff. Eat the fruits and the veggies and the higher quality, more whole grain based foods, your nuts and seeds, lots of those items, really wonderful for overall health. And then of course, like anything, when we're choosing foods in the grocery store, just be a little more mindful about maybe where your food is coming from. Ask a few more questions. I spend a lot of time at the farmers market talking to vendors, growers about their products. And oftentimes, even though I'm not buying an organic based item, most of the farmers there can tell you exactly where they're growing, what they're using, and they're really very proud to talk about the food that they're growing. So it's a wonderful opportunity. If you haven't visited your local farmers market in a while, get in there and see what's going on with some of your local growers. Those are the people that I think we want to support the most. What's interesting to me is I've certainly met people that would say, I would much rather buy an organic bag of carrots versus myself. I would much rather buy the local based carrot at my local farmer's market where I can talk to them and maybe it's not organic based, but they can tell you how they've grown it and they're not using unnecessary amounts of pesticides and herbicides because it costs them more money to do that. They're really mindful of that. So again, think broadly on this because it wouldn't make sense to buy a bag of organic carrots from California if you live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I'm from, when I can get some from our local growers in my own province that are not traveling on planes, using a lot of extra fossil fuels, and are certainly produced in a way that's very respectful to our health and to the earth. So something to think about. I always find that kind of entertaining when people make that choice. So as a dietitian myself and a parent myself, buy a mix of both organic and conventional things. That's what our family tends to do for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes it's based on seasonality. Sometimes it's based on taste and enjoyment. I can tell you that an organic-based strawberry probably tastes a heck of a lot better than most conventional ones. At least every time I've done a taste test, it's always going to win. But I can also tell you that sometimes it's quite the opposite. So from a culinary and a taste and a nutrition perspective, perspective, you probably want to go with the variety is the spice of life here, and just be a bit more mindful about asking where your food is coming from. I think that's number one when it comes to this overall debate on organic versus conventional. So I'm curious for your comments. This is a big topic to navigate. I'm hoping that I've provided you with a few sort of initial ways to think about it. And again, at the end of the day, the bottom line is more plants, regardless of whether they're conventional or organic based. That is where we need to start from a nutrition perspective. So let me know in the comments what you thought. If you've got some questions for me, how do you approach this whole debate on organic versus conventional? I'd love to know in the comments from you. And if you found this video particularly helpful, I would encourage you to share it on your feed, like it in Facebook here, and drop me a comment that you at least found this helpful. Because like I said, this is a topic that is not easy to navigate. It's a big beast. So, signing off for now. Again, I'm Andrea Hallwegner, registered dietitian from Health Stand Nutrition. You can read more about this topic and a little bit more of a summary of the information I went through today on that link that you're going to find right at the top of the Facebook link there. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same place, 12:30 Mountain Time on Facebook Live, and I look forward to seeing you then.